Hey folks, I'm sorry, I'm pretty sure I lied to you in the last video. I think in the last video I said in the next one we'll get into talking about C++. We won't. In this one I want to talk about the importance of documentation, style, and standards in our software development. So this is kind of the guidelines that we're going to follow so that we're producing quality code, not just any old code that kind of does what we want. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this, and I'm going to come back and harp on this over and over and over again as the semester progresses, because we don't want to simply produce something that more or less works. We want to make sure that we're producing a quality product. Again, especially if you're going to wind up doing this for a living, you're not going to wind up doing this for a living long if you're producing garbage code. So this is some of the stuff that I want to get into next. When we're working on a project, whether it's something small that's just for us, or whether it's something huge where there's hundreds of people involved in the creation, and it's going to be used for years by thousands of people or millions of people potentially, we want to make sure that we are producing a quality product and that we can continue to work with it for as long as this thing's going to be in use. A lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort goes into the design and development of systems. Right? For a big system, you can have a lot of people involved. You've got the people who were designing the system. You've got the people who were actually interacting with the user in the first place to find out what it was that they wanted, or the clients. You've got the programmers who are actually writing the code. You've got the content developers that are putting together the audio content and the text content and the video content. You've got the people who are managing the project, both on the client side and on the developer side. You've got the end users. You've got the people who are going to be testing the product. You've got the people who are going to be supporting the product. You've got the people who are going to be maintaining the product. You've got the people who are going to be selling the product. Right? There's a huge number of different people that are going to be involved in a project, especially a big one. And so all of these people have to be on the same page as to where we are in the development process, what this thing is going to do, how it's going to work, how much it's going to cost, who's doing what with what, who's responsible for which parts, when they have to have their job done. There's a huge amount involved here. Now, these systems might be in place for years and years and years and years and years, right, as one version moves on to the next, moves on to the next. And it's entirely likely that the people who were involved in the original creation of it are long gone when it's still being maintained and still being worked on. So we have to make sure that everybody who's going to work on this for the lifespan of the project can actually figure out what's going on. So you have to produce high quality code that people can actually read and understand and modify and maintain. And you have to produce quality documentation so that everybody can read this and figure out what their role in something is, how it works, what they're supposed to be doing, what to expect if this happens. And so we tend to come up with styles that we're going to follow in both the writing of the code and in the processes that we're going to follow and in the way we're going to write our documentation, so that everybody knows where to look to find the information they need. Everybody knows how to present it in a way that's going to be understandable to everybody else, and we can try and do things in a consistent fashion. And so we're going to agree on some kind, well, they might be imposed upon us, but we're going to agree on some kind of set of standards for the rules that we're going to follow, for how things look and feel, how things are going to be organized, and the processes we're going to follow. So these standards are going to include both the documentation and the code and the processes. Right? As far as the documentation goes, there might be a lot of different layers of documentation associated with the project. Right? The initial proposals, where we're first trying to figure out what it is we want to do, the requirements documents that detail exactly what the user wants in the end. So again, these might be developed after we decide that the project's actually feasible and we're going to go ahead with it. We'll figure out exactly what we want. There might be all sorts of project management plans detailing how we're going to run the project and updating them as we go. There might be a specifications document that details the exact solution. Once we've figured out how we're going to meet those requirements, what's the code going to look like? Right? So it's specifications detailing what all the different parts of the code are actually going to do. Then there's all the user documentation, right? Any user references or guides or manuals or tutorials, online or offline, web stuff or interactive stuff. All of the maintenance documentation that's going to be maintained, all of the support documentation that's going to be maintained. And so there's a huge amount of information that winds up getting recorded and maintained for large projects, aside from the actual code that we're writing, right? Aside from the application itself. And again, we want to make sure that everybody can read our code and understand it, read our documents, know what to find where in the documents, make sure that the documents actually look professional and they have a consistent look and feel to them. You know, you don't have one chapter of a document that was written by one person in one font, you know, double spaced and whatnot, and then the next chapter written by somebody else in a completely different font and different spacing. You want to make sure that this thing looks professional. It looks like it was well done. It's easy to understand. It's easy to follow. So this is easier in the long run if we agree on general rules for how we'll do things. So this leads to standards, and teams might have standards, organizations might have standards, your client might have standards. There might be government standards for certain kinds of system. Right? So there's all sorts of things that we have to try and follow. There are a ton of different existing standards out there for code and for documentation. What an organization, you know, some of these things might just be a couple of pages long, some of them might be 80, 100 pages long. And so what an organization or a team will often do is look around for an existing standard and then modify it to suit their needs and to suit their preferences. So this is going to be pretty typical. For this course, we will have a set of standards that I'm going to hold you to. And when you're writing your lab exercises and when you're writing your project, you will have to follow these if you actually want to get full marks for the lab or for the project. So I'll talk about these a lot as time goes on. As we introduce new language features, we'll talk about the standards and the expectations I have for how you use those features when you're writing your code. And we'll talk about some of the reasons behind those standards, you know, why they're not just totally arbitrary and me being annoying, but there are generally ideas and kind of motivation behind the specific standards that we choose. So if we take a stab at this, and I'll just give you a quick look at them before we plow on here. Yep. Oh, have to fix that typo there. So it's actually in labs, I believe. There we are. So the code standards for the course will have rules on how you have to compile things or how things have to compile, and essentially it comes down to things have to compile cleanly with a bunch of different warning options turned on. Rules about, you know, if you get an idea from elsewhere or you get a piece of code from elsewhere, then you have to make sure that you actually have permission to use that, and you have to make sure that you include an attribution of that in the work that you turn in so that I know you got that code from somewhere else. There'll be all sorts of different bits and pieces of, you know, different standards, different rules for what the output has to look like, for the structure and the layout and the nature of the code that you're creating. Again, we'll talk about all of these as we introduce the different language features, but it is something that I'm going to expect you to refer back to over and over and over again. You know, before you submit your labs for grading, make sure that they're following the course standards. All right, I think that was actually the end of all the preliminaries, and next time we can actually get into looking at some C++ code for real.